Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. Investigators are searching for answers after Wednesday's massacre in San Bernardino, California. Syed Rizwan Farouk and his wife, Tashfeen Malik, slaughtered 14 people and wounded more than 20 others in an attack at a social service center shortly after Syed left a holiday banquet he was attending there. The husband and wife returned later, wearing military-style gear, ski masks, and wielding assault rifles. They were killed in their getaway vehicle about 4 hours later in a furious gun battle with police a few miles from the killing spree. They had 1,600 rounds of ammo with them, and at their home, investigators found 12 pipe bombs, tools for making more explosives, and 3,000 rounds of ammunition. On Thursday, President Barack Obama would only say that the shooting rampage could be terror-related. He also raised the possibility that it was due to a workplace dispute. The president made another appeal for gun control legislation. And the United States will expand its fight against ISIS. On Tuesday, speaking before a congressional committee, Secretary of Defense Ash Carter announced the deployment of additional special forces to Iraq and Syria.
We're sending, on President Obama's orders and the chairman's and my advice, Special Operations Forces personnel to Syria to support the fight against ISIL. Through our own action and those of our coalition partners, the military campaign will destroy ISIL's leadership and forces, deprive it of resources and safe haven and mobility.
Carter did not offer troop numbers, but said the U.S. forces would act in cooperation with the Iraqi government and could conduct unilateral operations in Syria. Carter also, in an historic announcement, said that all jobs in combat units would be open to women for the first time. Meanwhile, British lawmakers on Wednesday approved airstrikes against Islamic State targets in Syria. Ahead of this week's parliamentary debate, Cardinal Vincent Nichols of Westminster said that military action against ISIS is justifiable, given the grave harm being inflicted on innocent civilians. These efforts, he said, must be combined with sustained diplomatic and humanitarian efforts. On Tuesday, police in Italy and Kosovo arrested 4 Kosovars with ties to ISIS for threats made against Pope Francis. The 4 men were under investigation for being terror apologists and inciting racial hatred via social media. According to police, the suspects had posted images on Facebook of themselves with weapons and in poses typical of ISIS fighters. Most alarming, however, were the men's posts celebrating the Paris attacks and threatening Pope Francis. They said, quote, "There won't be any Pope after this one. This is the last," end quote. With a renewed urgency, world leaders gathered in Paris are expected to develop the first ever universal climate change agreement. After 20 failed attempts, the 150-plus nations are working toward a non-binding, self-defined emission goal so that each nation can control its own greenhouse gases. Since the U.S. Congress does not need to ratify such an agreement, President Barack Obama was confident that it would prevail.
So our task here in Paris is to turn these achievements into an enduring framework for human progress. Not a stopgap solution, but a long-term strategy that gives the world confidence in a low-carbon future.
Aboard his papal plane returning from his African visit earlier this week, the Pope said that mankind is on the verge of suicide because of climate change. He said it is either now or never for the world's leaders in Paris. We'll discuss all of this later with Governor Chris Christie. Stay tuned for that. And the Republican-led U.S. House dealt a blow to President Obama's climate change policies this week. On Tuesday, lawmakers voted 243 to 181 to block EPA rules that would strictly limit power plant emissions. House Speaker Paul Ryan said the vote was about protecting American jobs in a troubled economy.
I don't think we're out of step with public opinion wanting jobs, wanting economic growth, weighing the costs and the benefits. And I think when you weigh the costs and the benefits against these so-called legally binding obligations, they don't add up.
President Obama has promised his veto. In Northern Ireland, a Belfast High Court ruling could lead to an easing of abortion laws. Abortions are currently legal in Northern Ireland only when the mother's life is at risk. However, Judge Mark Horner said Monday that the current law criminalizing abortion violates provisions of the European Convention on Human Rights. He ruled that the law protecting preborn children is incompatible with human rights. The bishops of Northern Ireland decried the ruling as profoundly disquieting and took issue with the judges describing babies with fatal abnormalities as, quote, doomed. Northern Ireland's Attorney General is likely to appeal. And the debate on the recently completed Synod of Bishops for the Family continues. This week, Cardinal Raymond Burke took issue with the conclusions of a close papal confidant, Father Antonio Spadaro. The Jesuit priest recently penned a summary of the Synod in which he claimed the Synod Fathers approved an internal forum approach allowing divorced and remarried Catholics to receive communion. In other words, remarried divorcees could receive the sacrament without an annulment so long as there is a process that includes reconciliation and repentance. Not so, according to Cardinal Burke. In an op-ed for the National Catholic Register, he noted that several Synod participants have reported that the bishops did not approve the internal forum solution. Moreover, Cardinal Burke said, the Synod cannot open a door which does not exist and cannot exist, namely, a discernment in conscience which contradicts the truth about the supreme sanctity of the Most Holy Eucharist and the indissolubility of the marriage bond. And a federal judge has canceled Christmas in Indiana, or at least one version of it. On Wednesday, U.S. District Judge John DiGiulio issued a ruling forbidding students at Concord High School near South Bend from performing a living nativity scene. The school has conducted the annual Christmas show every year since 1970. The Freedom from Religion Foundation and the American Civil Liberties Union sued the school district to have the performance pulled, backing a student and a parent who took offense. The judge ruled that the nativity scene impermissibly conveys an endorsement of religion and thus runs afoul of the Establishment Clause. The Christmas show is scheduled for next weekend. The school district is considering an appeal. And the internet was aflame this week with dire reports concerning Mother Angelica's health. It all stemmed from a recent newsletter from the Sisters of Our Lady of the Angels Monastery in Hanceville. In it, the sisters mentioned that Mother's health had declined in recent months and that she was placed on a feeding tube. This led to wild speculation and alarm, which included one headline that read that Mother was, quote, fighting for her life. Mother, however, is doing fairly well, all things considered. I saw her just a few weeks ago. She has, in fact, been on the feeding tube for months now, and she's getting the nutrients that's needed. Her condition's stable. She still receives the Holy Eucharist almost every day. She sleeps a lot, but she's more mobile than she's been in quite a while. The nuns even take her to the chapel from time to time. So though she's not greatly improved, she looks well, and she's certainly well taken care of. So keep Reverend Mother and her sisters in your prayers. Well, 'tis the season to trim and light your Christmas tree. And this week, two of America's most iconic trees were lit. Here in Washington, House Speaker Paul Ryan helped light the Capitol Christmas tree on Wednesday. The 74-foot Alaskan spruce was decorated with more than 2,000 handmade ornaments.
I hope it will be a reminder throughout this Christmas season that even in the darkest of times, God is there, and He is good, and we should look out for Him in our lives. We should strive to do His work. And for those of us who are Christians, He gave us His only Son. And for all Americans, whatever you believe, He gave us this great country.
And with much pomp and celebration, a national TV audience and tens of thousands of people watched the 10-ton Christmas tree come alive at New York's Rockefeller Center. It It was covered with 45,000 lights and 5 miles of wiring. How'd you like to put that in a box come January?